Maura hadn't wanted to join the support group. Joining felt like admitting defeat, and Maura was no defeatist. She only agreed in order to placate her girlfriend. Nina hadn't even wanted to look at their strings when they first arrived, which wasn't very surprising. Nina was always the cautious one. But when they finally opened their boxes at Maura's urging, she instantly wished they hadn't. Nina had tried her best to allay Maura's fears, to convince her that the strings weren't real. But Maura had been fighting a queasiness, a lack of appetite, and a general sense of dread ever since the day they'd looked. And then, about a week later, Nina returned home from her office and told Maura to sit down, that she had something she needed to tell her. "Deborah got a call today," Nina said slowly, "from someone at the health department." Her eyes had already turned glassy, and she was struggling to find the next words. But Maura understood. "Just say it, Nina. Just fucking say it." Nina swallowed. "They're real." Maura jumped off the couch and sprinted to the bathroom, crumbling onto the cold tiles. When she vomited into the toilet, Maura could feel Nina holding back her dark curls, and she knew Nina was holding back tears. "It's going to be okay," Nina kept saying, gently rubbing her hand up and down Maura's back. "We'll get through this." But for the first time in their 2 years together, Maura couldn't find comfort in Nina's words. They sat in front of the television the following night, their hands clutched together, as the president made a speech urging citizens to stay calm, and the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services made a speech outlining the researchers' findings, and the Director of the World Health Organization and the UN Secretary General both made speeches calling for global solidarity and compassion during this moment of uncharted crisis. The Pope even emerged on his balcony in the Vatican City to address the millions of frightened souls who were no doubt waiting for his guidance. I would like to remind everyone of the words we repeat at each Mass, the mystery of faith. We know that faith, true faith, calls upon us to accept that some mysteries will always lie beyond our comprehension while here on earth. The Pope declared, his words translated for all. Our knowledge of our Creator will always be imperfect, as we read in Romans 11:33, "Oh, the depth of the riches of the wisdom and of the knowledge of God! How incomprehensible are his judgments, and how unsearchable his ways!" Today we are faced with the incomprehensible, the inscrutable. We are asked to believe that these boxes contain knowledge that has, until now, been reserved for God alone. But this is not the first time that we have been called upon to believe in what was once unbelievable. Even the apostles did not believe, at first, that Jesus Christ had risen from the grave, but we know it to be true. And just as I have no doubt in the resurrection, I have no doubt that these boxes are a gift from God and to his children. For there is no one else more powerful, more knowing, and more giving than the Lord of our God. But Maura did not see her box as a gift. Every day, as hundreds of thousands of people celebrated their 22nd birthdays by awakening to a new wave of boxes, the situation grew increasingly urgent. They couldn't just keep guessing at what their strings foretold. A team of analysts collaborating between the U.S. and Japan was the first to offer a solution. A government-sponsored website that would enable at-home users to interpret the length of their strings. The researchers had amassed the measurements of thousands of different strings, down to mere fragments of millimeters. They had concluded, based on the earliest data that the length of one's strings did not, in fact, equate with the time left to live, as some had initially posted. The measure of the strings held instead the full measure of one's life, from the beginning until the end. Presuming the longest possible string accounted for the rarest lifespan of approximately 110 years. The researchers had gradually worked their way backwards to establish an estimated guide to string length and its corresponding lifespan. They couldn't offer an exact date. The science wasn't quite that precise. But users could visit the website, enter the length of their string, and, after clicking past 3 more screens designated to make absolutely certain that they wished to proceed, and agreed not to sue over any bad news, they would finally see the result, printed all too clearly in black Times New Roman, the time in which their life would end, narrowed to a window of barely 2 years. What was, at first, a vague awareness that Maura's string was not nearly as long as Nina's soon crystallized into something crushingly concrete. Maura's string ended in her late 30s. She had fewer than 10 years remaining. Through the early days of April, Nina wanted to talk with Maura about what was happening, and she often did talk with Maura, but she worried that she couldn't offer the same type of support that a fellow short stringer could. "You know that I will always be here for you," Nina said, "but maybe there are others who can be there for you in a different way. My sister said that her support group has even started hosting some string support groups." "I appreciate that you're trying to help," Maura replied, "but I'm not sure I want to be surrounded by a bunch of people weeping about their unfinished business." "Well, apparently they have different types of sessions based on how much time is remaining on your string. So there are groups for people who have less than a year left, and groups of people with maybe 20 years left, and then a group for those in between, like—" Nina looked unsure if she should continue. "Like me," Maura finished for her. "Obviously, you should only do what you feel comfortable doing, and I'll support you no matter what." Maura looked at Nina, whose slight frame appeared even more fragile in the dim light of the third-floor walk-up, and she agreed to try the support group, if only to wipe away the watery mixture of guilt and grief that had pooled in Nina's eyes as she spoke. Less than a week later, Maura found herself walking toward the school that would house her group therapy sessions. The streets had become a familiar scene. At least one business per block was boarded up by now. Often the owners placed signs on the locked doors and metal grates of their shuttered stores and restaurants with scribbled sentiments like, "Gone to live my life," "Spending more time with family," or "Off to make some memories." Maura passed by a piece of paper taped on a former jewelry store, "Closed, looking for closure." More disturbing than the signs, though, was another encounter, rarer but not entirely uncommon, of stumbling upon a stranger's discarded box peering devilishly above the rim of a garbage bin or from within a curbside pile of broken furniture. In the days and weeks that followed the revelations of strings, those reeling from the truth had found different methods of handling the unwelcome chess that had intruded upon their lives. Some, choosing willful ignorance in the hope of attaining its promised bliss, threw away their boxes to avoid temptation. The melodramatic hurled them into rivers and lakes or locked them away in a remote crevice of their house. The more cavalier just tossed them in the trash. Still,
Others attempted to obliterate the boxes in fits of rage, but these powerful chests, like the black box of an airplane, simply could not be destroyed, no matter how many times they were burned or smashed or violently trampled upon. Pedestrians who come across an open box that had been left on the side of the road, or perhaps flung out of a nearby window, tended to avert their eyes and quicken their steps, as if passing by a panhandler whose gaze they wished to avoid. Luckily, Maura didn't see any abandoned boxes that evening as she approached the entrance to the school. The quiet, brownstone-lined streets of the Upper East Side were too gentile or too uptight for such a public display of emotion, she thought. Fitting for its locale, the building looked old and fancy, the architectural equivalent of an elderly philanthropist dressed up for a benefit. It had one of those elaborate pre-war exteriors that retailers love to point out, adorned with tiny gargoyles shaped like griffins. As she walked up the wide interior staircase, past marble plaques quoting Plato and Einstein, Maura's fingers crept up to her face, touching the small turquoise nose ring she had worn since college that would surely violate the dress code of a place like this. Nina's younger sister, Amy, had taught at the school for several years now, but Maura had never stepped foot inside before tonight. She heard murmurs when she reached the second-floor landing and followed them to room 204. Thankfully, she was the last to arrive.